I have big concerns about a term I keep seeing on social media, and I keep seeing memes about it where it's, oh, let's blame everything on childhood trauma. And the reason people do this is because of childhood trauma. It's the trauma that they're living through. So what happens? What happens if people think they're living with childhood trauma? And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about violence or sexual abuse. That's a completely different kettle of fish. But I'm talking about the trauma that people believe they suffered thanks to the parental skills or lack thereof that their parents had. And they disagreed with the way they were brought up. And I'm no different. I am absolutely no different. And for years, I had huge issues with both my parents. And I don't want to go into that and in any depth because I want to talk more generically. So for a long time, I lived with a lot of anger and a lot of, I wouldn't go far as to say hate, because I didn't hate my parents. I hated some of the rules they did. I hated some of the things about the way they were, but I still loved them. And that's a very difficult position to be in when you can love and hate somebody at the same time. And I've thought about this. Why was that? Why is it so traumatic for us when our parents do things with which we disagree, especially when we grow up and become adults and we become our parent, or we become parents ourselves, and we realise it's fucking difficult. It just is. Bringing up a kid is hard. And, you know, you meet a partner and you have all these dreams and you talk about having kids and you talk about how wonderful it's going to be, and you read the books and you discuss things with other parents, and honestly, you have no fucking idea what it's going to be like until that screaming, noisy shit machine that just eats the money out of your pockets arrives. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a joyous event, but once they get past the very worrying baby stage, which is traumatic enough, it's the toddler stage, the terrible twos, and then they just go through these stages, and they are very demanding. Kids are very demanding. But still, I went through this. I raised children. I've got 4 kids and helped raise them. Sadly, I was absent for some of their growing up, so I missed that. And in some ways, it was a little bit of a cop out on my behalf. But I raised children, and I understand a lot of the issues that kids can cause. Yet, having gone through that experience, I never once stopped to think about my parents as being in a similar position to me. Not once. And thinking about that today, you know, I'm 61 years of age, and it's the first time I thought of it was today, hence I'm doing this video, that we hold our parents to a higher standard than we place on ourselves. Because they're our parents. They are the ones that brought us into this world. They are the ones who we grew up revering. And it's only our parents, generally speaking, that have this psychological hold over us. They are still authority figures in many, many ways. So what we don't see is their fragility. What we don't see and what we don't understand is that they're like us, just as fragile, with the same hopes, with the same fears, with the same weaknesses that we have. And yet we still hold grudges because we don't try and understand where they came from. And it's very rare that we're able as adults to A, understand, and B, have these conversations with our parents and put everything on the table. We just don't do that. And people go for years holding grudges, hating their parents. I did it, I know. And it's a horrible place to be. It's a horrible thing to do. And when you lose one of your parents, you suddenly realise how fucking fragile that relationship can be. Happily, I made the decision this year to go back to the UK and see my mum. And it allowed me to see things in different light. And it allowed me to put a lot of things for myself to bed. Now, I love my mum. I loved her deeply and still do. And she's passed on, and I still talk to her, and I still remember her somewhat kooky neurodivergent ways. But I realised how fragile she was as a person. And all those things that I hated, like she would never, ever say sorry to us. She really struggled to say, I love you. But that was her upbringing. That was the way she was brought up. And to her, saying sorry was admitting weakness. So she didn't. Because it gave her the feeling of strength. But actually, it's a very weak position to be in. And now I realise that so many people out there aren't having the conversations, and they just hold parents to a higher standard, and that's unfair. It really is unfair. So what I would ask people to do is see their parents as people, as weak and as fragile as the rest of us, and understand the psychology of what they do. And if somebody never apologises, it's not because they think they're always right. It's not because they're trying to be strong. It's because fundamentally they're actually quite weak. It's a weak position to hold, to never apologise, never say sorry. And you look at one of the candidates, who I shan't name, for president in the US, a very weak, sad and shallow man who is so desperate to give this aura of strength that he cannot apologise, he cannot say sorry. And he comes across as weaker for it. I respect people who admit their weaknesses, who say, do you know what? I am a flawed man. I am somebody who's got a lot of learning to do, and I'm open to suggestions. That's what I respect, because it's honest. It's being open. And so many parents feel they cannot be honest with their kids. Now, my children, I've had some very difficult relationships with in the past. And happily, I'm now out the other side. And touch wood, I have good relationships with all my kids. And part of that is because I've been honest with them, and I've listened to them, and I have accepted my flaws, and I've accepted where I went wrong. And all I would ask is that people just take that time. You've only got one set of parents, and don't take your issues forward. Deal with them. Don't talk about your childhood trauma. Deal with it. Get it out the way, move forward, because looking back and blaming your parents for your issues is the biggest cop-out. It's the biggest and weakest excuse that you have. said, don't do it.